Mr. Speaker, the Thanksgiving thoughts that I offer this evening were written by someone who sacrificed a great deal for someone that they loved. It has really nothing to do with roast turkey or pumpkin or all of the homey images that we've come to equate with this holiday. Tonight I want to speak of a day whose noble purpose and origins are often lost on those who think of it as only Turkey Day. The truth is, this national holiday has much more to do with presidents than it does pilgrims, more to do with our precious freedoms than sumptuous feasts. And yet it's wonderful to have Thanksgiving dinner with precious loved ones. It's wonderful to have that time with those that we care about. But this was also meant to be a time of giving thanks to God for all of His blessings, including the gift of freedom. Sometimes something gets lost in this season, forgetting it was bought by the blood of past generations of Americans, a sacrifice still borne by so many men and women in the armed services and the battlefield these very moments. A National Day of Thanksgiving to God was actually called after America became a nation by two of our greatest presidents and commanders-in-chief, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. The first one was in 1789, right after this new nation was still healing from the wounds of the American Revolution. General Washington, who had led those who favored revolution against the will of those who did not, was now seeking to unite a people with a new constitution as one nation under God. There wasn't another national celebration of the day for 74 years, and ironically, it was during the Civil War in 1863, in the midst of one of our greatest national tragedies, that President Abraham Lincoln called for all his, quote, fellow citizens in every part of the United States to set apart and observe the last Thursday of November as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens, so that, quote, God could and should be solemnly and reverently and gratefully acknowledged as with one heart and one voice by the whole American people. He went on to say, we've forgotten God, and it is the duty of nations as well as men to own their dependence upon the overruling power of God, to confess their sins and transgressions in humble sorrow, and to recognize the sublime truth announced in the Holy Scriptures and proven by all history, that those nations are blessed whose God is the Lord, unquote. Those words spoken nearly 1.5 centuries ago came from a president who had found his own faith just a few months before, as he walked among the graves of thousands of soldiers who had fallen at the Battle of Gettysburg. His heart had broken over their tragic sacrifice. Abraham Lincoln was a president who deeply valued the lives of all Americans, civilians, slaves, and all soldiers, including everyone who actually had fought against him. The just freedom of hundreds of thousands of slaves had cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. It was an unspeakable sacrifice that weighed so heavily upon him, and he believed only God could give him the strength to unite the nation again. He wrote a letter to a friend and said that he had not been a true believer when he left Illinois to assume the presidency. He, quote, I asked the people to pray for me, he wrote. I was not a Christian. When I buried my son, the severest trial of my life, I was not a Christian. But when I went to Gettysburg and saw the graves of thousands of soldiers, I then and there consecrated myself to Christ, close quote. Abraham Lincoln understood the high cost of freedom, but counting the cost and trusting God to hold and ultimately heal the nation, President Abraham Lincoln ended slavery in America forever. Mr. Lincoln and George Washington both understood the high cost of freedom and helped to forge a new nation with unheard of liberties, Mr. Speaker, including the right to disagree, and both of them called the nation to thank God. So, Mr. Speaker, as we prepare to go home to our families and loved ones, let us remember what every man and woman in the armed forces can tell you personally, that freedom is never free. And as we sit down to Thanksgiving dinner, let us be thankful to all of those who have died, that we might live in freedom. From the American Revolution to this current war we fight against jihadist terrorism. And let us thank the God from whom all blessings come for this marvelous gift we call liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.